My grandmother's lawyer cleared his throat and began to read the will. My cousin Preston inherited the Miami penthouse, worth about $4 million. His sister Bianca got the Palm Beach estate. And me? I got an old Singer sewing machine. Perfect, I thought. Fitting for the family disappointment. Preston laughed out loud. But later, when I learned what Grandma Dorothy had really left me, I ended up calling the FBI. The day of the will reading began like most of my disasters. My 2012 Honda Civic refused to start, forcing me to take 2 buses across town to the downtown offices of Hutchinson, Sterling and Associates. By the time I arrived, I was 20 minutes late, my worn-out teacher's blazer looking painfully out of place amid the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. "Raymond, there you are." Uncle Vernon's voice carried across the lobby, loud, impatient, and full of judgment. "We've been waiting. Do you know how much billable time you've wasted?" He stood there in his immaculate $3,000 suit, checking his Patek Philippe watch for emphasis. At 62, he looked like a man convinced the world owed him everything he'd never truly earned. Perfectly groomed gray hair, shoes that probably cost more than my rent, and a smile that never touched his eyes when he looked at me. "Sorry, Uncle Vernon. Car trouble. Still driving that old thing." "Raymond, you're 34. When I was your age, I owned 3 cars. When you were my age, you were also spending Grandma Dorothy's money," I thought but didn't say. Then came Preston, his son, an echo of his father, only smugger. "Ray, good to see you, cousin," he said, gripping my hand too hard, like everything was a contest. "How's the teaching thing? Still at that public school?" "Yeah, Franklin High. Going fine." He smirked at Bianca, who just arrived. Can you imagine? All that potential, and he's teaching high schoolers about the Civil War. Bianca leaned in to air kiss me, careful not to smudge her makeup. "Raymond, darling, you look tired. Are you eating enough? You know, my husband knows people on the Board of Education. If you ever want to move into administration, I can make a few calls." Her husband, Senator Blackwood, loomed behind her like a campaign ad, bright smile, firm handshake. "Good to see you, son." He was barely older than me, but had that politician's knack for making everyone feel junior. "Mr. Hutchinson is ready for you," the secretary said timidly. We rode the elevator to the 14th floor in silence. Preston scrolled through his phone, probably trading stocks worth more than my yearly salary. Bianca touched up her lipstick in a gold compact. Uncle Vernon stared ahead, already counting his inheritance. I thought about Grandma Dorothy, gone 6 weeks now. She'd passed on a Tuesday while I was teaching my 4th period history class. The principal pulled me out, but I already knew. Pancreatic cancer had taken its time. She'd refused aggressive treatment, saying 91 years was long enough. The conference room was exactly what you'd expect for Florida's elite. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay, a mahogany table fit for 20, an art that probably cost more than my annual salary. I sat at the far end, like always, same spot I'd taken at every family gathering since Dad died. Mr. Hutchinson shuffled in, frail but dignified, clutching a leather folder. He'd been Grandma's lawyer for 40 years. His hands trembled slightly as he began. "Thank you all for coming." Mrs. Dorothy Whitmore was very precise in her instructions, and I'll read her will as written. He started with smaller gifts, $50,000 to her housekeeper, Maria, $25,000 to her gardener, several donations to charities she'd supported for decades. Then the real inheritance began. "To my eldest son, Vernon James Whitmore, I leave my investment portfolio to be maintained through the existing trust." Uncle Vernon nodded, unsurprised. $8 million, just like that. "To my grandson, Preston Vernon Whitmore, I leave my condominium property at 1800 Biscayne Boulevard, Miami." Preston actually fist-pumped like he just closed a deal. The room felt like a courtroom, and I was already the defendant. The air conditioning bit through my jacket. I tugged at my father's old blazer, a thin shield against decades of Whitmore disdain. "To my granddaughter, Bianca Marie Blackwood," the lawyer continued, "I leave the estate at 2847 South Ocean Boulevard, Palm Beach, including all furnishings and beachfront access." Bianca smiled sweetly, touching her pearls. "Mother Whitmore always said that property would stay in the family," she said, her eyes briefly meeting mine. "With the right people, of course." The polished table reflected our faces back at us. Mine looked small, distorted, exactly how they saw me. The teacher, son of the family disappointment, the one who never met the Whitmore standard. Preston texted about his celebration dinner. Uncle Vernon was already strategizing taxes on his windfall. There are a few more specific bequests, Mr. Hutchinson said, flipping pages. He read off small sums for distant cousins and trinkets for socialite friends from her country club. Jewelry for women who hadn't visited her once during chemo. And me? I sat there remembering the Tuesdays and Thursdays I'd spent at her bedside, bringing her deli sandwiches, listening to her stories about buying her first property in 1958, about men who told her a woman couldn't run a business, and how she proved them wrong one handshake at a time. You remind me of your father, she told me one of those last days. Arthur had integrity, Grandma used to say. That's rarer than money, Raymond. Mr. Hutchinson's voice pulled me out of the memory. Now, he said, glancing down at the papers, we come to the final personal bequest. To my grandson, Raymond Arthur Whitmore, I leave my 1952 Singer featherweight sewing machine, Model 221, currently stored in the attic of the family home at 445 Coral Way. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough for everyone to register what they'd just heard, before Preston burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, uncontrollable laugh that bounced off the windows. A sewing machine? He was wiping tears from his eyes. Oh, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. Ray gets a sewing machine. Preston, please, Uncle Vernon said, though the twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed his amusement. No, Dad, it's poetic. The teacher gets an antique sewing machine. What's he going to do with it? Teach homie C? Do they even have that in public schools anymore? Bianca leaned forward, voice syrupy and fake. Raymond, I think it's sweet. Grandma Dorothy always said you were special to her. This must have sentimental value. Sentimental value doesn't pay rent, Preston added. But hey, maybe it's worth $100 on eBay. I'll even help you list it. Mr. Hutchinson cleared his throat again. The sewing machine is a restricted bequest. It cannot be sold, donated, or transferred for a period of 10 years. Preston practically doubled over. You're kidding me. He can't even sell it. Ray, what did you do? Correct her grammar one too many times. I stayed still, face blank, like I trained myself to at every family event. But inside, I was reeling. Grandma had always defended me, my choice to teach, my refusal to chase money for its own sake. She told me once that the world needed people who built minds, not empires. Why would she do this? The remainder of the estate, Mr. Hutchinson continued, will be liquidated according to the 2015 trust. The family home will be sold, and proceeds distributed as outlined in Appendix C. Mr. Raymond Whitmore may collect his bequest at his earliest convenience. Uncle Vernon rose first, buttoning his jacket like a man satisfied with the outcome he'd expected all along. Well, Raymond, you'll want to pick up that machine soon. We're putting the house on the market Monday. Monday? Grandma's only been gone 6 weeks. The market's hot, he said, already heading for the elevator. No point being sentimental about real estate. The rest of the reading blurred into background noise, a chorus of greed and self-congratulation. Preston called his office to have champagne waiting. Bianca was already discussing renovations for her new estate with a senator, suggesting a tennis court where Grandma's vegetable garden had been. Uncle Vernon spoke in low tones to his financial advisor, probably strategizing how to fold $8 million into his portfolio. Not one of them mentioned her. Not one memory, not one tear. Just numbers, assets, and signatures. Raymond. Mr. Hutchinson's voice broke through the haze. There's also a storage key for the sewing machine. The house will be shown to buyers this weekend, so you'll need to collect it before then. He handed me a small brass key on a paper tag marked Attic East Wing. I slipped it into my pocket without meeting anyone's eyes. Don't forget to check if it comes with thread. Preston called after me. Wouldn't want you to spend your own money on accessories. The drive to Grandma Dorothy's Coral Gables mansion took 40 minutes through Miami traffic. I'd made that trip hundreds of times before, but this one felt final. The house sat on 2 acres of immaculate grounds, its coral stone walls glowing rose gold in the setting sun. Dorothy had moved there in 1975 when her real estate empire finally matched her ambition. Inside, the place felt lifeless. Maria, the housekeeper, was already gone. Every piece of furniture was shrouded in white sheets, ghosts of another era. My footsteps echoed across the terrazzo floors as I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and pulled down the attic ladder. The air was stifling, thick with dust and time. Boxes lined the walls. Christmas 1987. Vernon's college. Arthur's books. That last one made me pause. My father's name. His things, packed away and forgotten after his death 5 years earlier. I brushed a line through the dust on top of the box, leaving a clean streak that looked like a scar. In the far corner sat the sewing machine, small, black, and pristine in its hard case. A note was taped to the handle in Grandma's spidery handwriting, for Raymond. Handle with care. I carried it carefully down the stairs and out to my car. The case was heavier than I expected. As I set it in the trunk, Preston's BMW rolled up behind me. Couldn't resist seeing the old place one more time, he said, stepping out. His tone was casual, but his eyes were assessing. Dad wants me to make sure nothing valuable gets left behind. It's just boxes, I said. Mostly Christmas stuff and photos. Photos can be valuable, he said with a wink. Especially if they're compromising. Bianca's husband's got ambitions beyond the state senate. Can't be too careful. He disappeared inside. I sat in the car, watching the sewing machine in the rearview mirror, the black case gleaming faintly under the streetlights. Why this? Why give me something that looked so meaningless, especially knowing how they'd mock it? That night in my apartment, I set the machine on the kitchen table. The black enamel gleamed under the light, Singer spelled out in gold letters across the front. It was flawless, untouched. The needle had never been threaded. The foot pedal cord was still wrapped in its original paper. This thing had never sewn a single stitch. Grandma had told me stories about her first sewing machine, the one she used to build her empire, altering designer clothes for Miami Beach widows back in the 50s. Every fortune starts with a single thread, Raymond, she'd said once. Pull it carefully, and the whole fabric reveals itself. But this wasn't that machine. That one was in the Smithsonian now, part of their Women Entrepreneurs of the 20th Century exhibit. She donated it years ago, proud that her story might inspire others. I examined every surface, every hidden latch. Then I noticed the fabric tray underneath the machine. When I touched it, it shifted just slightly, as if something inside wasn't meant to be found easily. When I lifted the loose panel, my breath caught. Beneath it sat a white envelope sealed, my name written across the front in Dorothy's unmistakable handwriting, looping, elegant, and steady, even in her 90s. Inside was a single sheet of her personal stationery. The faint watermark of her initials, DW, showed through the cream paper. The message was short, but it rewired everything I thought I knew. My dearest Raymond, if you're reading this, then the vultures have had their feast. The machine is only the beginning. Look where the roses never bloom. Remember our talks about the old Whitmore estate in Coral Gables? Some gardens hide more than beauty. The truth about your father's death is there. Trust no one in the family. The combination is your father's real birthday, not the one Vernon tells everyone. All my love, Grandma D. I read it once, then again, then a third time, until the shaking in my hands subsided enough to breathe. The truth about your father's death. The words froze me. My father, Arthur Whitmore, had drowned 5 years ago when his fishing boat capsized off Key Biscayne. The Coast Guard called it a freak storm, a tragic accident that even an experienced sailor couldn't have predicted. I'd mourned him, buried him, and accepted that explanation without question. The ocean takes who it wants. That was what I'd told myself. But now Dorothy was suggesting it hadn't been an accident at all. By dawn, I had made up my mind. At 6 a.m., I called Franklin High and left a voicemail claiming food poisoning. Then I packed a thermos of coffee, grabbed my shovel, and drove straight for the old Whitmore estate in Coral Gables, the first property Dorothy ever bought back in 1958. Unlike the mansion where she'd spent her later years, this place had been abandoned for decades. She'd kept it for sentimental reasons, always refusing to sell no matter how many developers came knocking. Some places hold stories you don't sell, she used to say. The wrought iron gates were rusted, but not locked. I pushed them open, the hinges shrieking in protest. The driveway was cracked, weeds pushing through the concrete, nature slowly reclaiming what was once hers. The house itself was a fading relic, a 2-story Spanish colonial with boarded windows and vines crawling up its stucco walls. But I wasn't there for the house. The garden behind it stretched for acres, once Dorothy's pride and joy. She'd grown everything there: tomatoes, peppers, mangoes, even avocado trees that still bore fruit long after she stopped tending them. But her masterpiece had always been the rose garden, except for one corner where nothing ever grew. "I'll pass, Preston." There was a pause on the line, then a scoff. "Your lost cousin. By the way, did you ever figure out what to do with that machine? I know a vintage shop that might give you 200 for it." I didn't reply. I just ended the call and stared at the phone for a long moment, listening to the hollow silence that followed his voice. $200. That was what he thought integrity was worth. Then I called the FBI. The Miami field office transferred me twice before I was connected to Special Agent Patricia Martinez in financial crimes. I told her I had evidence of embezzlement and possibly murder connected to the Whitmore estate. She sounded skeptical at first, her tone clipped, polite, procedural. "Sir, we get a lot of calls like this. What exactly makes you think $30 million siphoned through offshore accounts?" I interrupted. "I have bank records, signed letters, emails, and recorded phone calls implicating Vernon and Preston Whitmore in the death of my father." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Don't touch anything else," she said finally, her voice tightening. "Where are you right now?" 2 hours later, the abandoned garden was swarming with agents. Evidence photographers worked methodically around the steel box. Forensics technicians bagged documents, lifted prints, and took samples of the soil. It was surreal, watching the quiet corner of Dorothy's once proud estate turn into a federal crime scene. Agent Martinez crouched beside me as she reviewed the contents of the flash drive on her laptop. Her brow furrowed deeper with every file she opened. "Your grandmother was very thorough," she said finally. "This is prosecutable. The financial crimes are airtight. The murder, that'll be harder, but we'll build it." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you go back to your life and act like nothing happened. We'll take it from here. Can you do that?" I nodded, though the thought of pretending nothing was wrong made my stomach twist. The next 3 weeks were torture. By day, I was Mr. Whitmore again, teaching history, grading papers, discussing essays on revolutions and reform with students who had no idea that my own family was on the verge of implosion. By night, I replayed every moment of my father's death, every family dinner where Vernon and Preston had smiled across the table, pretending nothing was wrong. Preston called twice more, casually checking on estate matters. His tone was smug, his words oily with condescension. Uncle Vernon even invited me to lunch to discuss your future. I declined both. Then came Thursday morning. The arrests were coordinated across 3 cities. Vernon was taken at his country club in Coral Gables, right in the 9th hole. According to the news reports, the agents waited until he lined up his shot before stepping forward, badges flashing. The cameras caught everything. Vernon Whitmore in his pressed golf slacks, surrounded by stunned friends as agents read the charges aloud: murder, conspiracy, embezzlement, wire fraud. Preston's arrest in Manhattan was even more spectacular. FBI agents entered his investment firm during their morning meeting. When they announced themselves, Preston bolted, actually tried to sprint through the office in his Italian loafers. He made it as far as the elevators before being tackled by a federal agent. The video went viral within hours. Bianca's turn came during a charity luncheon in Palm Beach, where she was being honored for her philanthropic leadership. Agent Martinez later told me she fainted when they read her charges: money laundering, obstruction, and conspiracy. Her husband, Senator Blackwood, wasn't charged, but his career evaporated overnight. The investigation uncovered everything: 47 shell companies, dozens of falsified property transfers, loans taken against Dorothy's assets to fund their private luxuries. Every penny they'd stolen, every lie they'd told, documented in Dorothy's careful handwriting. The murder evidence was harder to prove, but the prosecutors had enough. The tampered hydraulic system, the meetings with Torelli, the sudden offshore transfers right after my father's death, it all painted a damning picture. Faced with a third strike, Torelli turned witness. His testimony sealed the case. The trial lasted 6 months. I sat through every day I wasn't teaching. I watched as my family, what was left of it, unraveled under the weight of truth. Vernon's defense tried to cast him as a dutiful son, a businessman overwhelmed by his mother's affairs. That image shattered when prosecutors played a recording of him calling Dorothy a senile old witch who should have died years ago. Preston broke next. Facing life in prison, he took a deal: 25 years in exchange for testimony. He described everything. How Vernon planned the boat's sabotage, how they timed the storm, how they laughed afterward over scotch in the study. When asked if he felt any remorse, Preston turned in his seat and looked straight at me. Arthur was going to destroy everything we built. You mean everything you stole? The prosecutor asked. Preston's lips curled into a faint smile. Everything we deserved. That single word, deserved, summed up their entire philosophy. Vernon received life without parole. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours. Bianca got 15 years for money laundering. Her husband filed for divorce before the sentencing. When it was over, I expected relief. Instead, I just felt quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a long storm. Then Mr. Hutchinson called. "Raymond," he said, "there's an addendum to your grandmother's will." It was sealed with instructions to open only after the successful prosecution of the involved parties. I met him in the same conference room where I'd once been humiliated. This time, I was alone. "Your grandmother restructured everything 2 years ago," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "The bequests to Vernon, Preston, and Bianca were conditional on their innocence. Since they've been convicted, everything reverts to you. Every property, every investment, every account, $50 million in total, plus restitution damages." Inside the folder was another letter. Dorothy's handwriting again. "My dearest Raymond, if you're reading this, justice has been served. I knew the truth about your father's death within weeks. A mother always knows when her child has been murdered. But I was old, sick, and outnumbered. I couldn't fight them then, so I built a path for you to finish what I began. Truth grows where secrets are buried. The sewing machine sits in my classroom now, encased in glass beside Dorothy's story. My students ask why it's there, why a history teacher keeps an old sewing machine in the front of the room. Because history isn't just about the past, I tell them. It's about the threads that connect us to those who came before. Sometimes pulling one thread unravels everything. Sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen. Last week, a student lingered after class. She looked at the sewing machine, then at me. "Mr. Whitmore," she asked softly, "how did your grandmother know you'd figure it out?" I smiled. She knew I'd remember her stories. She knew I'd care enough to look deeper. But mostly, she knew I was my father's son. That was the real inheritance, not the money, not the mansion, not the legacy. It was the belief that truth can survive burial if someone loves it enough to dig. Sometimes the smallest gifts carry the greatest power.